Hey everyone, Erica with Creators and Coffee, and joining us today is a special edition of our vlogcast as we've got Danika Fickler and Chance Collins, who are members of the Colorado State Formula SAE team. Having gotten to know Danika, I was excited to have them on because there's a lot that goes on with Formula SAE, and it's a really interesting opportunity. It has some unique differences for brands and sponsors and people wanting to get involved in racing, people wanting to get involved in automotive in different ways, but at that college level. So welcome, Danika. Welcome, Chance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. So for those not very familiar with Formula SAE, give us a little background on how does it work? Is it aligned with just the universities? Is it, what's it comprised of, and how can you participate?
So Formula SAE is a group of colleges around. We have different ones. There's some in the United States, some in Europe, some in Australia. And essentially, it's a group of students that come together to build a Formula type race car, open wheel, and compete against 120 schools every year, at least for the IC class. And there's multiple different other classes, such as an EV team, or a new upcoming one is a hybrid team, although that's not as popular. But that's the summary.
I like the pictures, a whole bunch of little Priuses on that one. Okay, so the acronym stands for the Society of Automotive Engineers, or Student Automotive Engineers. And so do you have to be an engineering student to be a part of it?
Absolutely not. Danika here is a prime example.
I'm a clinical psychology major, and I'm the vice president. We now have about a good 20 people on our team who aren't engineering majors at all completely.
And they're just as important as any engineering major, to say the least about that.
Very cool. So you just said, Danika, this is really interesting. So you're vice president.
Yes.
So is that of the team? And what are your responsibilities for that?
It is of the team. So what I take care of, create culture on the team, take care of fundraising. I'm also the business lead. So I make sure I have a group of about 10 to 15 people on the business team, and we take care of all the finance, outreach events, sponsorship stuff, social media, everything like that is what I take care of.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So this is like legit. Like you're basically practicing running. And then Chance, what's your role on the team?
So I handle all suspension systems on the team. So springs, dampers, wheels, tires, steering, ergonomics a lot of the time. So driver seating, pedal box. It's a lot of fun. So.
And how did you both get involved? I mean, did you come to college being like, I'm going to do this? Were you already in racing beforehand?
I've been in racing my whole life. I started racing when I was 8 years old in quarter midgets, then moved to junior dragsters. And then with drag racing was in the high school class. And then now I race in Super Street and Pro ET. My dad recommended me joining. My dad, he also, since it's just about drag racing, he didn't know about Formula SAE either. And so I joined last year, so this would be my second year.
Very cool. And then what about you, Chance? Did you know about it? Were you already in racing?
So I'm originally a motocross kid. So I was really involved with endurance run motocross. So I do like 50-mile races. And once I reached high school, I kind of quit that, like my sophomore year, and went to go work for a company called Westcott Designs that we design, build components for purely like Toyota vehicles, just in the off-road world. And then I got involved with trophy trucks. And then I kind of got into college. I originally was going to Arizona State. That's when I first saw my first ever FSAE car. And I'm like, I want to do that. Arizona State didn't quite work out for me. So then I joined this team last year after transferring. And you just got to get involved.
Yeah. And so for getting involved, does someone have to be in racing ahead of time to be able to join the team? Or is it something like you set up a little table at like freshman orientation or like back to school week and be like, hey, we're the FSAE team. You should like check it out.
Yeah, that's exactly how we do it. We have a lot of people. Yeah, we have a lot of people who either come like they either did some sort of racing beforehand or they're just into racing. But we've honestly
Yeah.
had people join who were never into cars. Like some of our EV lead fully admits he was never into cars before he joined this team.
That's so awesome. Okay, so very fascinating. And if anybody is interested, or if you've got some of the people watching this, or if you've got kids going to college, or you or someone watching this and you're going to college, you're at college, check it out. If it's something you think you want to get involved in, you can probably just Google the school and see if they've got a team. Because you said there's how many teams total in the U.S.?
There's over 600 in the U.S.
That's wild. I had no idea. And that's very cool. And my guess is, too, as Formula One has now mainstreamed, it's probably getting more popular, I would think, especially, like.
It very much is. We see a lot of students, especially in this, at least on my sub team, a lot of kids are coming in and they're talking about like gravitational brake bias adjust that like Red Bull runs, and they're also talking about like our crazy like heave dampers that are like computer controlled, and like sometimes we gotta dial them down a little bit, and we gotta realize that we are still students or not full-time race engineers. But
you're like, let me get right on that.
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, if you want to go research it, go ahead. I'm not discouraging from pushing the limits of our knowledge, but it's definitely
well, and that actually then dovetails kind of into a few different topics really well. In that, so you guys are clearly on some kind of budget, besides just the human effort involved in those participating or being a part of it. How does it work for funding for all the things? Does the university pay for that? Do you guys have to, you mentioned Danika sponsorships. Like how does the money side work?
So some schools, their university will help them out with costs. For ours personally, we get little to no help from our school. So all of our money comes from sponsorship, fundraising that we do on our own. So like something we have open right now is our RAM funder. And then sometimes someone last year, their parents wanted to pay for all the safety equipment on the team.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is strictly we are fully 100% student funded, and we raise our own money completely.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. We'll put a link for the YouTube version in the comments. If anybody did want to support it. That makes me think of, well, having been at Arizona State, you might know a little bit of this, Chance. So Arizona State they had like a hockey team, but like they didn't really have anywhere to play. And it was kind of like a budget hockey team. So one of the kids' parents threw down a lot of money, and now they have an arena, a beautiful arena. It's great. I love it. The Coyotes used to play there, and now that's why they left, because they had to play at a college arena, and that was not cool. Yeah. But it's a beautiful arena. It's great. The best part is, though, it was named after the family, and the last name is Mullet, which is just awesome. So Arizona State has the Mullet Arena. Yeah, it's the best. It's the best. And obviously, Danika, your family's in the business, but like, where do you even start to find sponsors? And what would you say as someone who manages the sponsorships and has to go out and find these sponsors? What are the benefits for manufacturers to sponsor Formula SAE teams? Like, why should they be like, oh, shoot, that's interesting?
Honestly, it is way harder to gain a sponsor than people initially make it sound like as a school itself. But honestly, for a couple companies, as long as you find that right one, if you just ask them, they will help you in any way they can. I'm lucky enough to have like personal connections and ask through sponsorships. But some sponsors, the hard thing is that they're able to provide free product, but sometimes without having any money, it is really hard to fund the team itself. Because while you are providing that really expensive, nice product, it's very nice and it helps out a lot. But without having any bit of money, we can't find those little gaps or keep continuing to buy product to fund the team. Like competition itself, like we have to take care of our own expenses as a team to be able to stay. And our competition is in Michigan, and we have to, fund all the housing, fund travel for all of that. It gets extremely expensive really quick. Last year alone, we spent over $90,000.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and it gets pretty insane. But one reason why teams should, or brands should, look for FSAE teams is that these students are the future of the automotive industry. And I think sometimes some brands forget that, how big their name is to people who aren't a part of that. Because like right now we're working with Summit and brands like Haltech. And to so many students, they think that's so cool to be able to work with like two of the biggest brands in racing. And that's one of the biggest thing. And one of like Primoris is our main sponsor. They make solar panels. They sponsor us is because a lot of our students go and end up working for them. And I think sometimes brands forget that if you're helping a team, that team wants to work for you.
I mean, it's almost like a built-in recruiting funnel. And I know Danika says she wants to go into clinical psychology, but you're getting a little MBA in business there, girl. I don't know. I feel like one of these brands is going to try to bring you in, run operations, run marketing for them. We'll see. We'll see as you start to look at those PhD costs versus getting a real paycheck. We'll see what happens. We'll see. Okay, so you brought up a few really interesting things for those brands, right? A recruiting funnel is really powerful, getting their name out there. Obviously, anybody getting involved, and what I think is fascinating is even someone like the guy you mentioned who's your EV lead, where he wasn't really into cars. It's probably hard to go through and not then get into cars. So obviously you've got future consumers. And my guess is you're probably also getting, social coverage. A lot of the teams, I know you all have a social following. You've got a following on social. So then it's also just like anything, getting that brand publicity, getting out there, and to your point, it's the future, right? The Gen Z generation, which you all fall into at the top end, is 30, right? So this is, we're spending, a low end being 16. But this is a great way to really start to connect in with Gen Z as well, because a lot of brands are still acting like boomers are the main, pro tip, the boomer generation, the amount of consumer spending they control is declining, folks. It is declining. And Gen Z being the largest users of social media, 92%, followed up by Gen X actually being the second highest users of social media. So there's the wealthiest generation and the largest generation. So let's go back to, you mentioned costs and $90,000. I think this is another really interesting thing. You mentioned your vice president of the team. You guys really run this like a true team. There's no teacher doing it all for you. There's no faculty doing all, like you guys have to create your own budgets, your own, everything, and then figure out how to get that funded.
It's really interesting. So, I mean, I'm just going to reference last year because it's the most I know about. But last year with the funding, we kind of had like the word that kept getting spread around was infinite money glitch, because we had a lot more money than we previously had. But funding gets quite interesting. Danika's put in some hard budget cuts. Last year, suspension spent $25,000 alone. We made some crazy parts that kind of failed on us, but that's a story for another day. But in terms of funding, like us going out, reaching out to companies, we're thankful to get a lot of parts sponsored. Like we got our steering on the suspension side, we got steering rack sponsored. We're able to get materials sponsored, but again, a lot of it comes out of our own, like some of our parents' money and just finding companies, because we try to do events that requires funding. There's little things like nuts, bolts that fall through the cracks because sure, you got that fancy engine sponsored, but how are you mounting that engine? Or weld wire, that's a huge one. Put our chassis to a stop. last year for at least a couple of days because we were like, oh crap, we don't have weld wire. That's something you don't think about. You order the tubes and you're like, oh, how do I connect these things? Unfortunately, glue doesn't work. So
Yeah. This also brings up you're talking a little bit about what I'm finding so fascinating too for brands and why to get involved is not only is it from a recruiting standpoint, you've got people learning business skills, budgeting skills, building schools, but it also sounds, you made the comment about some of the, the gung-hos, and you do have engineers on the team and people building. It also sounds like you guys are probably a little hotbed for R&D and innovation and just trying like cool new shit.
Yeah, we're always trying to push the limits. We'll get into it, like how I said, like some parts failed. So we kind of pushed the limits of the suspension last year. It was kind of last minute. So we made a decoupled front suspension. If you want to reference a company that does it very well, it's Multimatic. They do it for FSAE teams, and that suspension assembly just for one system alone is, I believe, like $6,000. Unfortunately, we don't have the money to do that, so we did our own. That actually worked out quite well, but it puts a load through control arms, which our control arms at the time were made out of aluminum, which we saw Porsche do it, and we were like, well, if Porsche can do it, and also Chevy does it, and we're like, okay, maybe we can do it too. It worked out initially for the little test runs that we did. The rear aluminum control arms failed pretty quick because the axles were a little too long, and it put a weird moment on the control arms and bent them quite nice. So we made some steel ones in place of that. We did manage to go to comp with front aluminum control arms, and under the brake test, they folded. We got a perfect 90 degrees out of one of them, so the control arm was perfectly
right.
That was pretty cool to see. And then 3 hours later, we made some steel ones in the back of our trailer, locked that thing up, and welded some new ones. And it was pretty cool because the design judges, we came back out with the car, and they looked at me, they looked at Keon, our chief engineer, and they're like, how are you even out here right now? We thought you guys were done. And we're like, well, it was just the pure grit of the team and not saying that we're done that got us through. And we managed to complete some static events quite well.
Okay, so this brings up then to another good point just around education and how this works. So it's not, how does the winning work? Because it's not like you guys just go out and have, I think some people think it's like a race season where you're doing all these different races, but it's not really that. It's a little bit different.
This competition was formed in the 70s, and like the goal was a professor looked at the kids he was teaching, and he said, none of these kids know how industry works. And at the time, cars were on a huge incline of we needed automotive engineers. So this kind of started as an engineering design competition. Like, could you build a vehicle that can compete against other vehicles? So it very much still is that. Cost is a huge point score. So the lowest costing car gets higher points than other cars. We also have a design competition. So design judges from like Tesla, like engineers from Tesla, like Ford. I think we had a Lamborghini engineer out there the other day or last year.
Oh, wow.
You don't get to see them all, but there's quite a lot of engineers that come out for this, and they ream you pretty well. They will keep you talking until you say, I don't know why I did that. They'll go down into some pretty intense details. And then there's a business presentation as well. So there's a whole business side of that. That's kind of a more newer, I think it started in the 2000s. They started adding some actual business presentations. What else am I missing here besides the static or the dynamic events?
And so this is all the stuff that happens, what you were mentioning, Danika, like in Michigan, where you go and it's this big competition and you're competing against 120 different teams.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have one big competition in May, so typically during finals week or the week before. And then sometimes some schools will host mock competitions. So last week when we were at K-State, every year they host Formula Week, so it's mainly Midwestern schools in Colorado.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's just one competition in May.
And then do you guys race the vehicle as part of it, or?
We do. Yeah. So we have a couple events. We have an acceleration event, which Danika drives in. It's just straight line, pedal to the metal. We got pretty good score at Formula Wheat, which was, we didn't actually get to compete this year in acceleration. We got to the line, but they closed the gates as soon as they're like, we're just done for the day. So there is like a time limit you have to meet in there. There's a skid pad event, which is just basically a figure eight. So you go around one loop one time and another loop like two more times and head out. Then we have an autocross event. And then the autocross event positions you for the endurance event the next day. And that's where your car has to survive 13 miles of driving. Managing to complete that alone is a feat in itself.
Yeah.
But actually scoring high is even more
harder.
Important. So
wow.
Yeah. But before we're able to do all that, we have 2 days of teching the car. And that is sometimes the hardest thing. I think only like a quarter teams go make it through tech all the way first try. And then with teching, there's brake test, noise test, fuel test,
tilt test.
and tilt test.
Wow.
Tilt test is pretty impressive. They tilt the car like 60.
I saw that on your social. Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, that's pretty nuts.
Also, there's kind of the recruiting for race teams downstream. I mean, there's even the opportunity, while race teams are usually out trying to hustle for their own sponsors, a lot of them would be smart to be sponsoring the FSAE teams because that's their next generation, whether it's drivers, whether it's people on the business side of the teams, people that already know it. I mean, like, I'm sure there's a lot of people like, oh, I'd love to work for Formula One, and they come out of like random, and they just think it's cool, but they have no real experience. But if you were to come out of an FSA, like you actually know a lot of these things. And I'm sure the cost side for a lot of these teams and even the bigger sponsors of the teams, like keep an eye on costs for this other team. Yeah, let's get those guys because they know what they're doing. So yeah, guys, did you hear Danika does budget cuts? So, stop her from becoming a psychologist. And so just kidding. I'm all about that. You can be my therapist one day. So yeah, so there's just so many opportunities. Now, from a brand standpoint, if they were to watch this, let's say, or, how do they get in touch with the FSAE teams? Do you guys have websites? Is social the best way? Like, what's the best way if they see this and they're like, damn, we want to, sponsor these guys? Like, how do they go about that?
So we personally do have a webpage. It's connected to the engineering department itself. That is one great way. It has our email, and that's the easiest way. And then other than that, our Instagram page that we're pretty active on. Email we respond to quick, and same thing with Instagram.
Well, this was awesome. Any advice that you would give to brands when it comes to these types of partnerships or to people wanting to get involved in Formula? Like any advice or kind of parting thoughts you have?
For brands, I'd like to say just these kids, they want to learn. Like, they think it's so cool to work with you guys. Like, they are so interested in your brands, and they'd love to honestly be more educated about brands. I feel like sometimes, like, brands sometimes think what they do is a little self-explanatory, but a lot of, like, these guys are honestly some of the smartest guys I've met. One of them selling products they're making to other teams because other teams struggle to make it. Like, I think brands underestimate how much respect all the students have for what they do because they want to do what they're doing eventually.
I love that. What about you, Chance?
Honestly, like I couldn't agree with Danika more. We push ourselves to kind of the limit of our knowledge and even go beyond that just to try to get a competitive edge on other teams. So I feel like there's a driving aspect. It's not just like you're sponsoring some kid that wants to build a car that's going to drive it around every other weekend at some track. It's us trying to be better than another school, trying to show that we can do like basically impossible. I mean, you're telling a group of 100 or 50 to 100 students to build a car from scratch. It's kind of a crazy feat of engineering just to like even know where to start. Like you can say, yeah, let's put 4 wheels on a chassis, but to make that actually move and do what you want.
Do you guys rebuild the car every year?
Yeah, so we have to do a completely fresh car every year. So it's not like there is like knowledge built on top of, so we get to see mistakes built from the previous car, but it does require you to build an entire new car per rules of the competition. So
wow, that's awesome. And then so you guys finish up in May, start back when school starts. So it sounds like, going back to this brands and people want to learn, this could also be a hotbed for internships.
Oh yeah, like I think we mentioned that the previous president of the team is currently working at McLaren in Europe, and then the previous chief engineers working for Penske Porsche, North Carolina. He's now a data analyst on the suspension team. We have people from the 2013 working on the F-35 right now. So, there's people going into aerospace. A lot of them still go into the automotive. I've seen recently, like Tesla was at our competition, and they open for students that are coming into FSAE. There's a lot of opportunity just purely for you being on an FSAE team. They have QR codes that they don't put out anywhere else, and I recommend other companies hop on, do the same, because FSAE students' grades don't look the same as other students, but I can almost guarantee you that we can outperform an A+ student, even if we're like a C student. So
that's awesome. And yeah, I would say there's probably not a shocker that the other manufacturers aren't always the most relevant when it comes to the teams they employ. So that's a good pro tip. We'll throw that one out for the automotive manufacturers and really anybody, just such great talent. Everybody's complaining, and you got a hotbed right here, 120. And how many kids you say are on the team? 50 to 100?
This year, we had a huge growth. We have over 80 kids on the team. And last year, we had about 50.
So,
wow.
Yeah, it's definitely getting way more popular.
Yeah. So if you've got 120 teams, and I can't do that math that fast, but let's say it's somewhere between 6,000 to 7,000 to 10,000 kids are there or something, that's a lot of people that are your target demographic for future team members.
And that's just the United States. There's Europe, which even gets crazier. Some of those teams in Europe have $1 million budgets, and I've seen them sponsored by Red Bull. So
jump on, sponsors. I love this. Well, this was awesome, you two. Thank you so much. But really appreciate this, both in education on Formula SAE, as well as, great tips for brands and great reasons for them to get involved. So Danika, Chance, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And hope to see you guys post up that big W in May.
Oh, we're down for it.
So, yeah.
All right.